We have a special interview with one of the state attorneys who prosecuted Joseph Ferlazzo. The jury didn't buy his self-defense claim. They found him guilty of first-degree murder. This all happened on Friday. Ferlazzo shot and killed his wife, Emily, while they were in Vermont celebrating their first wedding anniversary.
He jumped onto the bed. He put this throw pillow over her face, and he shot her once and twice, directly into the left side of her head.
A powerful closing argument there in front of the jury. Let's bring in our special guest. The state attorney in Chittenden County, Vermont, Sarah George, is with us. Sarah, thank you so much for taking time out this morning to speak with us about this case, about this guilty verdict against Joseph Ferlazzo. But I want to start with the victim in this case, his wife, 22 years old. What can you tell us stuck out to you about Emily as you learned more about her story?
Good morning. I think the thing that I heard the most from her family and friends was her love of singing, and that she was always singing no matter where she went, that she was very kind. She was always trying to help others, that she loved animals, but mostly that she really loved to sing.
And I know they have got to be very thankful that justice was served at this stage of the case, knowing that sentencing is ahead. But can you walk us through what some of the challenges were in a case like this? We all watched what is the end result, which you know is a trial, but were there any major challenges as you all went through the litigation process?
Certainly not the challenges that I've had in other homicide cases. They did attempt to have his confession suppressed, and that was unsuccessful. They attempted to keep limit our ability to talk about the postmortem wounds that Emily suffered, and they weren't successful in that. So we did have some litigation, but this is a really strong case. It has been since the beginning. The Vermont State Police did an absolutely excellent job sending this case to me. So I didn't have the issues or the challenges that I have in other cases, which was certainly made going to trial significantly easier.
Yeah, the police work in this case just top notch, especially when I harken back to what you said during opening statements about his plans, how he was trying to get things covered up. He had to go to her parents' house. He had to take his motorcycle. He was on his way back to try and discard of her remains that were still in his van, but for the police already being there. Can you talk about that part of it and how much longer you think it would have taken to solve this case if he had not been interrupted in those plans to get rid of her remains?
Yeah, that was certainly a close call. I think that had the police been there even hours later, this would have been a significantly different case. I think he had plans to get his Jeep there and get her body and bring it somewhere into the woods. And we live in Vermont. There's a lot of options. If he'd stayed in Vermont, even it would have been a much more difficult case to prove at the time. It would have taken us finding her body, and who knows how long that would have taken. And cases without a body are significantly more difficult for prosecutors. So I was so grateful that Trooper Cody did what he did at the time. He talked to him while he was in New Hampshire so that we could get to the van before Mr. Ferlazzo could.
Is there more that you can tell us about that communication? Because that seems like it had to be almost a very quick decision. Sometimes missing persons cases take much longer for the police to get involved, but what was unique here?
I think that when, this was all happening around the same time as Gabby Petito went missing. And so I think that, I don't know, Trooper Cody never said this, but I think there was something about his statement at the time mimicking what was said about Gabby, that he knew that something was off. And he made that decision to call Sarah Lang, the friend that Joseph Ferlazzo said in Albans that he had got a ride to, and she answered and immediately told him that the van was there. So I think that was just really good police work. He knew that something was off about his statement. And then I also think that second to that is because he had just given that statement and he had given Miss Lang's name, I think that that's when Joseph Ferlazzo knew that he had a very limited time to get back and get the remains.
Wow, Sarah, that's so interesting that you mentioned Gabby Petito, because when we've been describing this case in preparation for the trial starting, describing the synopsis of someone who was in a van with his wife, showed up back home without her and claimed that she ran off. So many people have said this reminds me of the Gabby Petito story. So to know that there's a possibility that it was on the minds of investigators and could have helped, I think that's significant. I appreciate you sharing that. I do want to go back to a moment that is always a turning point in a case, and that's when a defendant takes the stand. Let's go back to a bit of his direct examination. Joseph Ferlazzo trying to tell the jury what his point of view was and reason for the shooting.
I was holding my Glock, and she started just like coming up at me, and I just fired.
Why?
She was gonna shoot me.
And you were afraid?
Very. She said, "That's it, you're dead." And she threw her arm under her pillow, and she pulls her hand out with the Taurus. And
How were you feeling?
I was feeling horrified, just
Were
like
you afraid?
I was terrified.
Sarah, I heard you several times during that direct having to remind the court that leading questions are not allowed on direct. We definitely picked up on a lot of that happening during his testimony. But were you anticipating him taking the stand? Was that something you were prepared for from the beginning? Did they let you all know that as you were getting closer to this trial starting?
We did know that. The defense team had told us really since we realized we were going to trial that Mr. Ferlazzo wanted to testify. He wanted to tell his story. And we had no idea what that was going to be because he had given such a thorough and thoughtful and coherent confession. So we knew he was going to testify, but we didn't know what he was going to say.
See, that's interesting to me that usually we don't know everything that's happened in pre-litigation. Sometimes there are filings, there's motion in limine, sometimes it's clear what the defense is going to be, but it's more difficult for prosecutors because the defense often can hide the ball a lot more than a prosecutor can. So that's interesting that you're saying you all didn't know. Are you saying even his defense that, oh, this was self-defense and that she had been abusing me allegedly for all of these months?
We knew they had told us that he was going to claim self-defense, and the court had asked specifically if that was based on a statement that he gave to police or if he was going to give a new statement with new details. And defense had told us that that would be new details. So we did know self-defense, but the details of it we learned during the opening statement, and then during Mr. Ferlazzo's testimony, we really didn't know much more than that. He had given some statements in his confession video interview about this prior alleged abuse, so that part wasn't necessarily surprising to us, but her having a gun, that was the first time we've heard that allegation.
Wow. And you said the word there, detailed. He was quite detailed on the stand about mostly things that didn't matter to the case and to the actual incident. Yes. But let me ask you about what happens next, because right now we're looking ahead to sentencing. What's the range in Vermont? Is there any discretion that the judge will have? And have you made a decision on what you all will be asking for?
So in Vermont, a first-degree murder charge comes with a mandatory minimum of 35 years, up to and including life without parole. It's one of the only charges we have that allows for life without parole, and it's used very sparingly in Vermont. People serving life without parole. So the chances here are more likely that he'll get somewhere between 35 and some higher number than that, up to life. And we haven't decided yet what we will ask for. The family obviously wants to be a part of that conversation. I want them to be a part of that conversation. We want the sentence to be meaningful, rather than just some sort of arbitrary number. So we're going to meet and go over what that might look like. But from my perspective, had Mr. Ferlazzo just sat at the defense table and made the state prove their case, this would probably be a 35 to life case, but he didn't do that. He made the choice to get up on the stand, and from our perspective, he lied and he disparaged Emily and blamed Emily the entire time. So that is an aggravating factor in my mind that would lead to a higher sentence.